Hello and thank you so much for joining us on Business Now, where we share details of financial happenings in the past week with you. My name is Chinaemerem Joseph. Now, after about 10 months of consistent decline, Nigeria's foreign reserves returned to a growth path, gaining $449.5 million in 1 week. While figures from the CBN reveals that the reserves rose from $33.4 billion in April, ending to $33.9 billion on the 5th of May, 2020. The reserves had slipped into a decline after hitting a high of $45.2 billion on the 11th of June, 2019. Now, during the last Monetary Policy Committee meeting, the Governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, Godwin Emefiele, said that the committee noted that the weakened revenue position of the federal government arising from the sharp drop in oil prices was worrisome. He reiterated the need for government to urgently reduce reliance on oil revenue by gradually diversifying the economy and improving tax collection. But how much has been achieved in this regard? These and more are issues that topped discussions in the business world. We will take a break now, and when we come back, we'll share some more stories with you. The Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund, Kristalina Georgieva, says the fund has already disbursed $3.4 billion to Nigeria and that the money is in the Central Bank of Nigeria. In her words, in emergency assistance, once the board approves that they disburse within days to the country and it goes to the central bank in dollars before it's converted to naira for the federal government's use. End of quote. She added that the conditions are quite favorable. The repayment period is 5 years, up to 2.5 years is a grace period, and the interest on the loan is 1%. The IMF boss said that there was a need for all receivers of the emergency funds in Nigeria to keep receipts of expenditure. She pointed out that Nigerians should demand accountability from its leaders in the spending of the emergency funds. She added that going forward, that Nigeria had already met and exceeded the safeguards for disbursement of the funds. This loan is the single largest disbursement by the Bretton Woods institution to any country that has been ravaged by the coronavirus pandemic. And then the federal government has for the second time adjusted the 2020 budget forecast to assume a lower oil price of $20 per barrel. The federal government has also projected that the economy will shrink by 3.4% this year following the outbreak of coronavirus. The Minister of Finance, Zainab Ahmed, disclosed this during a virtual citizens' dialogue session on government fiscal policy decisions in response to the fall in oil prices and the COVID-19 pandemic. The Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning, in collaboration with the Department for Internal Development, DFID, were the organizers of this virtual conference. Now, the focus was on Nigeria's response to the decline in oil price and the dire consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic to the economy. Aside the Minister of Finance, Zainab Ahmed, the Minister of State for Finance, Clem Agba, the Director General Budget Office, Ben Akabueze, and the CEO of the Nigeria Economic Summit Group, Lade Jayola, also participated. The virtual conference, which lasted for about 4 hours, ended with major highlights. Now, the federal government expects the gross domestic product, GDP, to shrink by 3.5% this year. What this means is, going by the country's current growth rate of 2.28% in the first quarter of 2020, the nation's economy will dwell in the negative zone as projected by the International Monetary Fund. And then the price of crude oil has also crashed badly, even though prices have marginally soared from time to time. The federal government has projected a 90% decline in oil earnings this year, This probably has led to the government once again slashing the oil benchmark from initially $57 to $30 and then $20 per barrel, with oil production left at 1.7 million barrels per day. And then several streams of government's revenue have already been affected by the downturn of the nation's economy, from customs to value-added tax, the aviation industry, and many more. The private sector is not also left out as businesses continue to suffer. Nigeria currently battles this situation with significantly low fiscal buffers, as at April 2020, the balance of the foreign exchange reserve stood at $33,440 million, while the excess crude account was about $72 million as at April 22nd, 2020. The Nigerian Economic Summit Group says the country needs about 10 trillion naira worth of intervention to smoothly scale through these trying times. But current intervention capacity through the coalitions against COVID-19 only stands at 4.5 trillion naira, and it is expected that the funding gap of 5.6 trillion naira will be covered through more borrowings domestically and internationally. From the nation's capital, Chinaemerem, Joseph, Silverbird News 24. The President, Muhammadu Buhari, has issued new directives on COVID-19 donations to Nigeria by philanthropists, companies, and international organizations. The Director of Information and Press in the Office of the Accountant General of the Federation, Henshaw Ogubike, made this known in a statement in Abuja. In the statement, the President was said to have approved the opening of 5 COVID-19 donor accounts, which form part of the existing Treasury single account arrangement in 5 commercial banks. He went on to explain that the framework covered all public funds allocated and dedicated to the fight against COVID-19, including the fiscal stimulus package, as well as all donations by corporate bodies and individuals to the federal government towards the fight against COVID-19 and the mitigation of its social and economic effects on citizens. He said the directive also included donations under the private sector coalition against COVID-19 fund domiciled at the Central Bank of Nigeria. The federal government has also granted import waivers for medical equipment and supplies to ease the fight against COVID-19 pandemic. A tweet by Tolu Ogunlesi, the special assistant to the president on digital and new media, said, and I quote, that President Muhammadu Buhari has approved that import duty is waived for medical equipment and supplies to strengthen health infrastructure in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, the waiver is the latest of the fiscal policies that have been introduced by the federal government to combat the economic implications of the COVID-19 pandemic. Announcing the government's fiscal response to the pandemic, Zainab Ahmed, who is the Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, had said that the government would engage other corporate bodies to know what they want the most. The Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation (NNPC) has effected a reduction in the ex-depot price of petrol from 113 naira 28 kobo per litre to 108 naira per litre across all its products loading facilities. A release in Abuja by the corporation's Group General Manager, Group Public Affairs Division, Dr. Kenny Obateru, quoted the Managing Director of the Petroleum Products Marketing Company, PPMC, Musa Lawan, as saying that the new ex-depot price of premium motor spirit, otherwise known as petrol, reflects the company's market strategy to make more sales while complying with the Petroleum Products Price and Regulatory Agency's price template. Mr. Lawan said that the new price regime would enable PPMC to boost its sales volumes from the billions of liters of petrol it has in storage while providing affordable price to millions of customers. He added that the new price was arrived at after extensive review of market realities by the PPMC Internal Price Review Unit. The PPMC MD, however, pointed out that the automotive gas oil, otherwise called diesel, being already deregulated, its prices are determined by market forces. And then the federal government has extended ban on all flights by 4 weeks as part of measures to prevent the spread of the coronavirus. Boss Mustafa, who is the secretary to the government of the Federation, announced this. He said the ban on all flights would be extended for an additional 4 weeks. The aviation minister, Hadi Sirika, also stated the need to train airline staff in safety measures before flights restarted. Lockdown restrictions have so far been eased in Lagos, the country's commercial hub, and the capital city, Abuja. The federal government has expressed dissatisfaction over the deliberate violation of the new guidelines to check the spread of COVID-19 at banks and other commercial places. The Minister of Industry, Trade and Investment, Adeni Adebayo, made this known at the weekly briefing of the Emergency Operations Center of the Committee on Sustainable Production and Delivery of Essential Commodities during COVID-19. Well, President Muhammadu Buhari had eased the lockdown, like we told you, with specific protocols which must be observed in business premises. The minister said until banks and other commercial institutions opened up all their branches, the horrible scenes observed around the bank's premises could pose a severe danger of the infection of COVID-19, as well as compromising measures put in place to tackle the spread of the pandemic. And then the president of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry has asked the federal government to suspend the 50% increase in value-added tax, give tax breaks to healthcare and pharmaceutical companies, airline manufacturers, agro-processors, SMEs, and hospitality players. Speaking at a press briefing, she said that policymakers and the organized private sector need to come together to rescue the economy from collapse at this critical time. Recognizing the role of business and investment in the economy, she said, is imperative to have an urgent rescue package that would enable businesses navigate the storms as well as preserve employment. She urged the Central Bank of Nigeria to review the cash reserve ratio downwards to 20% from the current 27.5% to enable commercial banks have more liquidity to support businesses. Also, we hear that the federal government has repatriated the sum of $311 million being recovered assets of late General Sani Abacha from the United States and the Bailiwick of Jersey. The Attorney General of the Federation and Minister of Justice, Abubakar Malami, disclosed this in a statement by the Special Assistant on Media and Public Relations at his office, Dr. Omar Gwandu. Now, according to the statement, the amount increased from $308 million mentioned in an earlier statement in February to over $311 million as a result of the interest that accrued from February 3rd to April 28 when the fund was transferred to the Central Bank of Nigeria. He said that the litigation process for the return of the assets titled Abacha Loot commenced in 2014, while the diplomatic process that culminated in the signing of the asset return agreement commenced in 2018. The agreement was signed on the 3rd of February by the governments of Nigeria, the United States, and the Bailiwick of Jersey. It added that the recovered loots were transparently and judiciously deployed in supporting indigent Nigerians, as specified in the agreement signed with Switzerland and the World Bank. The National Bureau of Statistics has reported that 40% of Nigerians live in poverty. This implies that 82.9 million Nigerians live in poverty. In its latest report about poverty and inequality from September 2018 to October 2019, the Bureau said in Nigeria, 40.1% of the total population were classified as poor. In other words, on average, 4 out of 10 individuals in Nigeria has real per capita expenditures below 137 naira per year. Now, this translates to over 82.9 million Nigerians who are considered poor by national standards. Nigeria is the top oil exporter in Africa, which has helped to create wealth related to crude sales that account for more than half of government revenue. But a failure to diversify the economy and build much needed transport and power infrastructure has stifled growth and the spread of wealth beyond a rich elite. Rapid population growth outstrips economic growth, which stands at around 2%. Well, the United Nations estimates that Nigeria will have a population of 400 million by the year 2050. Nigeria was already struggling to shake off the impact of a 2016 recession before the new coronavirus pandemic hit economies worldwide. Well, the NBS said it had changed its methodology for its study, so the figures could not be compared with previous reports on the same subject covering 2003 to 2004 and 2009 to 2010. Before we go, President Muhammadu Buhari has approved the appointment of Mr. Sunday Thomas as the Substantive Commissioner for Insurance and the Chief Executive Officer of the National Insurance Commission, NICOM. In a statement released in Abuja by the Special Advisor, Media and Communications to the Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, Yunusa Tanko Abdullahi, the President also approved the appointments of 2 board members for Nigeria Deposit Insurance Corporation, NDIC. Well, they are Mrs. Yana Talib Yaro as the non-executive director representing the Northeast and Mrs. Diana Okonta as non-executive director to fill the slot for the South-South. The appointments take immediate effect. And that's all we'll be taking from the newsroom for now. We'll go on a break, and when we return, we will bring you excerpts from the last briefing the Director General of the Debt Management Office, Patience Oniha, had with journalists on the country's total debt profile. To join us again. Thank you so much for staying tuned. Now, in January 2020, the federal government and the 36 states, as well as the Federal Capital Territory, owed a total of 26.2 trillion naira as of September 30, 2019. The amount indicated that the total public debt rose by a little above 2% in the 12 months from September 2018, when the federal government, the states, and the FCT owed a total of 25.7 trillion naira. The Director General of the Debt Management Office, Patience Oniha, shared these details at a public presentation of the country's debt stock as at September 2019 at an event in January 2020.
Okay, borrowing is the principal source of funding the budget deficit. So you can see about 90% or thereabout of the annual budget deficit is financed through borrowing. Okay, so we know the process of approving the budget, the various stages it goes through. So by the time it is approved by the National Assembly and signed into law, it is really something that all of us collectively have approved. Okay, so when people are talking about new borrowing, we should be confident that this has gone through the rigor of the Federal Executive Council, where we are all represented as states, the National Assembly, before we get there. So that's one of the points we want to raise here. The second point to raise is, as most of you know, the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan did say government to borrow pending when revenues increase. So, but what has happened? Yes, the government borrowed between 2015 and 2017. So we got out of recession in 2017, and what has happened? The level of new borrowing has been declining, as you would see from the table. So those are the key points to talk from there. For refinancing, in that one is just to say the third column is we obviously can borrow to refinance, but I wanted to focus more on financing activities and financing budget deficit. So you are not just talking about figures in the air. You have one in the budget, then you have the other one for external that goes through that rigor, okay? You're familiar with this again, but let me say, like I said, today I'm addressing the commentary on public debt management, okay? So you know that, and really what we expect is that when we are writing our reports, we should be able to educate the public. Borrowing is not approved by one man, is not determined by one man. It's a collective decision. So when we say, oh, this administration has borrowed, previous administrations also borrow. So borrowing is cumulative, but really there are rules and regulations for borrowing. So we just listed the various legislations there and the regulations. So you know about the DMO Act and the Fiscal Responsibility Act. So the point being made there is borrowing is not ad hoc. It's not a decision of one man or one woman. There are laws and laid down procedures that we comply with. In fact, the fact that that document was presented to the National Assembly was in compliance really with the Fiscal Responsibility Act and the DMO Act. If it was possible to just do it without those, then it would have been done, you wouldn't have known. So we're actually complying with the laws. Okay? So having the laws and the budget determine what the process and what the borrowing is. We also have a strategy. So budget says this is how much we should raise. But that process of determining should we issue FGN bonds, should it be, or treasury bills, should it be 5 years, should it be 10 years, should we go to the Eurobond market? All of that is driven also by strategy. It's not an ad hoc decision. You do know we have a debt management strategy that we've been running with, and what that strategy says is clearly written there. You have copies of the presentation for those of you who are writing. Okay, when we finish, you have this one, and I think Chinaemerem will have, she has your email addresses, so she sends it, okay? So all of what we've done 2017, 2018, and 2019 have been driven by the strategy. So if you look at the budgets, first of all, you will see that there's new domestic borrowing, new external borrowing for each of those years. It is because this strategy says, because domestic borrowing is more expensive, let's mix it with external. But in addition to that, you want external because it also helps reserves, and you can get more longer tenor. It also says that your domestic debt portfolio has a lot of short-term instruments, treasury bills. Treasury bills have also been trending lately. So let's extend that to long-term. So that's why you saw us active in the Eurobond markets in 2017 and 2018. And then for treasury bills, we repaid about ₦1 trillion of treasury bills using the proceeds of a 3 billion Eurobond. So there's a strategy around it. It's not what DMO feels or what it wants to do. Just keep it in mind that we're talking about the collective borrowing of the federal government, the states, and the FCT. That's one. Okay, so increased borrowing, did it just happen as well? The Economic Recovery and Growth Plan did say that government will borrow to bridge the gap in revenue. So we know what happened to oil prices. We don't need to go to that, as well as production. So we did say we will borrow. That will be not permanently in the interim. We'll borrow to finance, to bridge the revenue gaps, to finance infrastructure so that jobs can be created and we can stimulate growth. So that, what I'm saying is, again, it's not ad hoc, it's deliberate. And then some of us have sort of not talked about the fact that when the Naira was devalued from 199 Naira to 305 Naira, if you convert the external debt we had at that date without new borrowing, it increased by over ₦1 trillion Naira. So we're just saying we're presenting the facts to you. We agree that we borrowed more, but it's a strategy. And remember the other slide I showed you. So budget deficits have then been dropping after 2017. So also have the new borrowing. So we'd like you to have a balanced assessment when you are reviewing all the things you have, all the figures that are thrown at you. Okay, so debt sustainability measured by debt to GDP ratio. We talk about it because it is an international measure of debt sustainability. So as at September, we're at 18.47%. It is a collective decision by the executive and the legislature. And there are laws that make that compulsory. For instance, we didn't see the DMO put on, add 3.4 trillion of the promissory notes to the debt stock. Did we do that? No. All we will add is what the National Assembly approved. So FEC has approved everything, but the law says the National Assembly must approve new borrowings. That's why you haven't seen us. We only add what we have issued. That's because we are complying with the law. And that FEC approved didn't mean we will now go and issue all the promissory notes to the creditors. No. We have to wait until it goes through the process. So I'm just trying to say there's compliance with that process. It is not a one-man action. I also want to say that in addition to the laws, there's a strategy that determines how we now mix it, and between domestic and external, between long-term and short-term, there's a strategy around that. Let's also be mindful, I've said it several times, but let me say it again, because sometimes the discussions around public debt become extremely political. For as long as I can remember, we've been running deficits in our budget, whether oil prices were 110, 105, and production was over 2 million barrels per day. We're always running a deficit, which we funded from borrowing. All of that borrowing is still sitting in the debt stock. Okay, so unfortunately, crude oil prices dropped, domestic production also dropped, and we're borrowing, and that becomes an issue. Let's understand that debt is cumulative, and that most of the deficits in the budget have always been financed by new borrowing. What is good is that those figures are included in the appropriation acts, and you can see them and know them. Okay, so I've explained the relatively high level of new borrowing between 2015 and 2017. We're really for the government to meet the revenue gap, but it wasn't just let's do it. It was included in the economic recovery and growth plan. And I think we all know that while growth is still fragile, at least we exited recession, so we got some results from that.
Before we move on, the Director General of the Debt Management Office had expressed fears that the global economic effects of the coronavirus pandemic could frustrate Nigeria's attempts to service its debts appropriately. Now, according to her, Nigeria's debt is still sustainable, and as the total debt to GDP ratio was within a 25% limit, even lower than the 56% advised by the World Bank and IMF. The actual debt service to revenue ratio has, however, been high at over 50% since 2015, an indicator of lower revenues and higher debt service figures. Well, let's now bring you some graphic details of business transactions within the country. And it's here we wrap it up on Business Now. Thank you so much for your time. Don't forget to join us same time next week. My name is Chinaemerem Joseph. Bye for now.